Good day, everyone. We are the Group 4 and we will present to you the 5 philosophers. The first philosopher is Immanuel Kant, to be presented by Ms. Shan Rose Belien and Ms. Mary Jane Treyes.
I am Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher and is considered as one of the foremost thinkers of the Enlightenment. I believe that we all have an inner and outer self which can form a consciousness. I believe that inner self contains one psychological state and logical intellect. On the other hand, outer self includes our senses and the world we belong, or is called the physical world.
Here is the best example of my perspective. Someone who follows duty-based ethics should do the right thing, even if that produces more harm or less good than doing the wrong thing. People have a duty to do the right thing, even if it produces a bad result. Just for example, as a philosopher, the thought of lying is wrong in order to save a friend from a danger. If we compare deontologies with consequentialists, we can see that they begin by considering what things are good and identify right actions as the one that produce the maximum of those good things. So a person is doing something good if they are doing a morally right action. As a philosopher, every rational human being could work this out for themselves and so did not need to depend on God or their community or anything else to discover what was right or what was wrong. Nor did they need to look at the consequence of an act or who was doing the action. Although I noticed myself in a philosophical and quite difficult way, I believe that I was putting forward something that would help people deal with the moral dilemmas of everyday life and provide all of us with a useful guide to be morally correct. The second philosopher is Sigmund Freud, to be presented by Ms. Trina Candelaria, Ms. Sahara Nicole Candelaria, and Mr. John Charles Culia.
Hello everyone, my name is Sigmund Freud, an Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis. Today, I want you to know more about my theory of human personality development. But before we proceed, I discuss first the levels of human's mind. First is the conscious. It consists of all things we are aware of from ourselves and as well as our surroundings. Next is free conscious. It is about the things we could pay attention if we want to, and I call this level as accessible memory since we have the ability to store that memory and recover it easily. And the last one is unconscious, where we store things that outside the conscious awareness, including memories, thoughts, and urges, which we have to keep out since some of these are not acceptable.
Now that you have an idea about the levels of mind, let's proceed on its structure. In my theory, I stated that the personality of the person is developed by the interaction among these three fundamental structures. The first one is ID. It tackles about your needs and wants and how you will get it even if you hurt someone's feeling. Next is ego. It is about how you think on others people needs or wants, and you also think that being selfish will not able to help you in the future. Then the last one is superego, where an individual ensure their morality. Thus, they will not do things if they are aware that it is wrong.
For further explanation, here's the sample situation for Freudian theory. If you are falls under id category, your personality can be likely as child. Because in id personality, it is more pleasure desire. You satisfy only what you want and didn't concern for what is the consequence that you may face. For example, Linda wants to buy a new phone. However, since her money wasn't enough to buy a new phone, she do everything. She forcefully her mother to increase her save allowance so therefore she can buy a new phone. If you falls under ego category, your personality can be good because it is a balanced personality, wherein you likely to consider the situation before you act or decide for any action that you do. For example, Linda wants to buy a new phone. However, since her money wasn't enough to buy a new phone, she decided to save her money in her piggy bank and able to buy a desired phone. Last, if you fall under super ego, your personality be enough but not all the time. Because this personality can tend you to do only good actions. You are fear to do any bad things because you perceive bad things as always bad and never do that action. You tend to be like an angel. For example, your friend are in trouble wherein he experienced death threat from his enemy. In able to protect him, you need to lie. Lying wherein you didn't tell his true location for us to save your friend. However, since you have a super ego personality, you didn't do that because lying is bad. How can you save your friend from his enemy?
The third philosopher is Gilbert Ryle, to be presented by Miss Beatriz Manuel.
Hi, a great day to everyone. I am Beatriz Keisha Emmanuel of BSE Science 1, and today I will be talking about Gilbert Ryle's concept of the self. And at the end of this presentation, I will also give an illustration that explains Gilbert Ryle's perspective of the self. But before that, let me first briefly introduce this man named Gilbert Ryle. So, who is Gilbert Ryle? Gilbert Ryle is a British philosopher who was born on August 19, 1900 and died on October 6, 1976. He was known for his book entitled The Concept of Mind, in which he identified that the idea of the mind or of the soul was a category mistake. He also opposed the Cartesian dualism that deals with the dual existence of man, and which identified the latter as consisted of both the matter or the physical aspect and of the mind or the non-physical substance that's sometimes equated with the soul. His standpoint even led him to coin the dogma of the ghost in the machine, which emphasizes that the mental and physical activity occurs simultaneously but act separately. So now that we have learned a bit about this man, let's now move and take a closer look at Gilbert Ryle's concept of the self. So what's all about Gilbert Ryle's perspective of the self? Well, as what I've mentioned earlier, Gilbert Ryle is a known critic of René Descartes' philosophy. So if Descartes have this philosophical principle, I think, therefore I am, Ryle, on the other hand, have the philosophical principle, I act, therefore I am. What it basically implies about Ryle's concept of the self is that the way we behave or act is exactly the same to who we are. Hence, the concept of self for Ryle identified the self as the manifestation of our behaviors in a day-to-day basis, meaning it is not solely based on a particular event, but rather it includes the entirety of our behaviors, which varies depending on the context or situation that we encounter in our daily lives. This also reflects Ryle's belief that there is no such thing as a self that cannot be seen. Thus, he denies the existence of the internal and non-physical self and otherwise believes in the existence of the body. So now that we have learned about the concept of self from the perspective of Gilbert Ryle, we will now look on the empirical implication of Ryle's concept of the self. Suppose a scenario in which we witness or experience a particular charity work. Perhaps it is a medical mission or feeding programs. What is this usual thinking that immediately comes to our minds? Isn't it that constant impression that makes us to see these individuals involved in these acts of benevolence as having a philanthropic nature? Well, from that scenario, it is clearly depicted that our behaviors are what truly speak to that kind of self that we embody and demonstrate to other people. However, the self that was portrayed on the scenario that was given earlier is solely based on a particular event and shared behavior of those people involved in the said activity. So the fact that it disregards other behaviors of those people involved, especially when their interactions and activities are no longer within the scope of their shared advocacies, then it actually goes against Ryle's concept of the self. Because as for Ryle, in order for us to truly understand ourselves, then we must look at our behaviors on the bigger picture. Meaning, we must identify the concept of self as the representation of our overall behavior in diverse contexts and situations. May it be our behavior in school, in our house, in the workplace, in our community, or even our behavior whenever we encounter exciting or challenging situations. All these contexts and situations which shape the different behaviors that we have are what collectively constructed the concept of self as for Ryle's standpoint. So, all in all, what Ryle really wants to emphasize is that the self is something that one cannot particularly locate, for it is actually the representation of every parts, or which describes to every actions or behaviors that we demonstrate in our daily lives. This is just similar to Ryle's analogy of the university, which explains that no one can particularly locate the university by simply looking to its physical aspect, for it is actually consisted of interconnected and interdependent subparts which collectively what constructed the concept of a university. So, that's all for Gilbert Ryle's perspective of the self. Thank you, and I hope that you are enlightened somehow.
The fourth philosopher is Paul Churchland, to be presented by Miss Rona Toledo.
The next philosopher is Paul Churchland. Paul Churchland is a leading proponent of eliminative materialism, which is the radical claim that our ordinary, common sense and understanding of the mind is deeply wrong, and that some or all of the mental state posited by common sense do not actually exist. Churchland holds that the mental state and the processes are nothing more than the states and the processes of the brain. He also states that the basic idea of the cognitive activities are just ultimately activities of the nervous system. Churchland states that the eliminative materialism argues that the ordinary folk psychology of the mind is wrong. It is the physical brain and not the imaginary mind that give us our sense of self, which means that the body and the mind is different. Churchland asserted the sense of self is originated from the brain itself, and the self is a product of electromagnetic signals produced by the brain. Eliminative materialism have two parts. First is materialism. Materialism states that there is only the brain and the mental processes such as remembering, learning, feeling hungry, feeling dizzy that we are aware of, and actually states that physical brain itself. Next is eliminative, which means that as the neuroscience develop and as we discover more and more about the way the physical brain works, some of the psychological categories may not fit very well into the things that we are discovering about the nature of the brain. Overall, eliminative materialism means that the self is the brain. We always use our senses to see, or to feel real situation. Brain as our provider to see, feel, touch, taste, and smell. Lastly is folk psychology. Folk psychology seeks to explain human behavior in terms of beliefs and desires of agent explode, and that it will be eventually displayed by completed neuroscience. Folk psychology is assumed to consist both generalization and specific theoretical posits, denoted by our everyday psychological terms like belief or pain. The generalization are assumed to describe the various causal or counterfactual relation and regularities of the posits. For instance, a typical example of folk psychological generalization would be if someone has a desire for something and they believe that the best way to get that something is by doing such action, then they will do so. Based on this assertion, Churchland holds to eliminative materialism. Stated simply, eliminative materialism argues that the ordinary folk psychology of the mind is wrong. It is the physical brain and not the imaginary mind that give us our sense of self. That's all, thank you.
And for the last philosopher, he is Maurice Merleau-Ponty, to be presented by Miss Rosalinda de los Reyes.
I am Maurice Merleau-Ponty, a French philosopher, and my idea was from existentialism movement. I believe that physical body is important part to made of our subjective self. This philosophy is called I live in my body or live a body. These assert that self and perception are composed in physical body. Perception of mind and action of body are interconnected. For example, setting goals. We have our thoughts, perspective, and plan to achieve it, but it is not enough without actions. We need our physical body to make an action in everything we want to achieve.